When Eli Walker steps onto the empty field, he thinks it's just another late-night practice. But Coach Manuel's piercing gaze hides secrets that could change everything. Will he resist the pull, or will their forbidden tension finally explode? Subscribe for more steamy BL stories like If You're Hooked, and comment your theories on what happens next. The summer heat in Texas didn't believe in mercy. The air shimmered over the college football field, every breath thick with dust and sunlight. Sweat slid down Eli Walker's neck as he crouched in position, his fingers pressed into the turf, his pulse hammering louder than the whistle that signaled the start of practice. He'd been back on the roster for barely a week. One more chance after the suspension that almost ended his career. One more chance to keep himself from detonating again. The problem was Eli didn't do quiet. "Walker. Eyes up." The voice cut across the field, deep, even impossible to ignore. Eli looked toward the man behind the whistle. Coach Manuel Reyes. Everyone had talked about him before he arrived. The new head coach from Los Angeles, ex-NFL star with a reputation for discipline and impossible results. The kind of man who didn't yell. He didn't have to. Eli straightened, jaw tight. "I'm looking." Manuel didn't answer. He crossed the field with measured steps, clipboard in hand, eyes fixed on Eli like a spotlight. Even under the late afternoon sun, that look felt cold enough to slice through him. "Show me," Manuel said, voice low. Eli dropped back into stance. The coach knelt beside him, close enough that Eli could smell the faint scent of sweat and clean soap. Manuel's shadow spilled across his arm as he reached forward, adjusting Eli's wrist, his thumb pressing lightly against the vein that pulsed there. "Shoulder lower," he murmured. "You're tensing up before you move." Eli's breath snagged. It wasn't the touch, it was the calm control in it, the confidence that didn't ask permission. No shouting, no threats, just quiet authority that made every nerve in Eli's body listen. He adjusted, swallowed hard, and said, "Better?" Manuel's gaze flicked up. "You tell me." The silence stretched between them. Eli could feel the eyes of his teammates, the scrape of cleats on turf, the dull thud of a ball hitting the ground somewhere behind them, but none of it mattered. It was just the two of them, a still point in the heat. Finally Manuel rose. "Run it again." Eli did. When practice ended, the field emptied fast, players laughing, groaning, tossing towels at each other. Eli stayed behind to grab a stray football, still burning with the weight of that look. As he bent down, he heard the crunch of shoes on gravel. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" He turned. Manuel stood a few yards away, arms folded, clipboard under one arm, the last light outlining his shoulders. "Just getting in extra reps," Eli said, wiping sweat from his face. "You need rest more than you need punishment." Eli snorted. "Rest is for people who have something to lose." Manuel's eyes narrowed. "You do. You just act like you don't." That stung. Eli didn't answer. He spun the football in his hands instead, pretending the silence didn't crawl under his skin. Then Manuel walked closer, slowly, deliberately, until he was near enough that Eli could see the faint scar that ran along his jawline, a souvenir from the league maybe. "I read your file," Manuel said quietly. "You play like someone trying to outrun himself." Eli forced a grin. "Maybe I am." Manuel's expression didn't change. "You're good, Walker. Fast, sure. But you can't keep letting anger run the game. Control it, or it'll control you." The words landed harder than Eli expected. For a second he wanted to tell the man to back off, to stop acting like he knew him. But something about the tone, steady, almost protective, held him still. "Got it, coach," he said, voice rough. Manuel gave a single nod and turned toward the exit. But before he left the field he said without looking back, "Be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I'll work with you before the team arrives." Eli stared after him, heartbeat skittering. 6 a.m.? Voluntary one-on-one? He couldn't decide if it was punishment or privilege. Either way he'd be there. The locker room lights hummed, half the bulbs flickering. The air smelled like metal and detergent. Eli sat alone on the bench, towel around his neck, replaying the day in his head. He remembered the steadiness of Manuel's hand, the sound of his voice close enough to feel more than hear. He'd never reacted to a coach like that before. Hell, he'd never reacted to anyone like that. He caught himself staring at the steam curling off the showers, imagining the coach still out there in the field house, going over plays, unbothered, perfectly in control. That control fascinated him. He shook his head, muttered, "Get it together," and slammed his locker shut. The next morning the sky was still the color of ash when Eli jogged onto the field. The grass was wet with dew, the air tasted like rain. Coach Reyes was already there, stopwatch around his neck, hands in his jacket pockets. "You're early," Manuel said. "So are you." Manuel almost smiled. "I said 6. It's 5:55. "That's early," Manuel said and nodded toward the cones. "Let's see if you can move without fighting the wind this time." For the next hour, they worked in silence, Manuel's short commands cutting through the morning fog. Eli's muscles burned, but he didn't stop. Every time he faltered, the coach was there, adjusting his elbow, guiding his balance, his touch quick and efficient yet never casual. By the end, Eli was bent double, gasping. Sweat slicked his hair to his forehead. Manuel tossed him a water bottle. "You push like someone who hates losing." "I do," Eli said. "Good." Pause. "But hate can't be the reason you win." Eli looked up, chest still rising and falling. "And what should be?" Manuel's gaze held his, steady and unreadable. "Discipline." Something in the way he said it, quiet, almost intimate, sent a pulse of heat straight through Eli. He looked away, pretending to check his wrist tape. The rest of practice passed in that charged silence. When they finally stopped, the sun had risen over the bleachers, flooding the field in gold. Manuel picked up a stray towel, handed it to him. "You learn fast." Eli took it, fingers brushing the coach's for a fraction of a second. "Maybe you teach well," he said, trying for lightness. Manuel gave the faintest hint of a smirk. "We'll see how long that lasts." He turned and started toward the field house. Eli watched him go, a strange ache spreading through his chest. By afternoon, the locker room buzzed again, teammates roughhousing, music blasting. Someone joked about how hard the new coach was, how he barely spoke, but everyone listened anyway. Eli stayed quiet, stripping tape from his wrists. He could still feel the weight of Manuel's stare, the heat of the morning air between them. When the others left for dinner, he lingered, tossing the football from hand to hand, listening to its dull slap against his palms. The door creaked open behind him. "Still here?" That voice again. "Come." Too calm. Eli turned. Coach Reyes stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the faint exhaustion of the day softening the edges of his expression. "Couldn't sleep," Eli said. "Figured I'd practice routes." "You should rest." Eli shrugged. "Rest feels like quitting." Manuel stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him. "You confuse recovery with surrender. They're not the same." Eli smiled without humor. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like everything's a lesson." Manuel's eyes met his, dark and unwavering. "Maybe it is." For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them felt heavier than before, filled with everything they weren't saying. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above them. Eli finally broke the silence. "Why me?" Manuel frowned. "What do you mean?" "You could work with anyone. But you keep choosing me. The extra drills, the one-on-one. You push me harder than the rest." Manuel's jaw tightened. "Because you need it." That's not an answer. The distance between them felt small, a few strides at most, yet it pulsed like a live wire. Manuel looked away first, exhaling slowly. "Because you remind me of who I used to be." The honesty in that hit harder than any tackle. Eli didn't know what to say. He took a step closer, then another, until the air itself seemed to hold its breath. "Coach," he said quietly, "don't look at me like that." Manuel's eyes flicked back to him, and for an instant the mask slipped, the steady calm replaced by something warmer, rougher, dangerously human. Then he blinked, stepped back, and the wall between them went up again. "Go home, Walker." Eli swallowed hard. "Yes, coach." Manuel opened the door, light spilling from the hallway, but before he walked out, he said without turning, 6 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." Eli watched him leave, heart pounding in rhythm with the echo of footsteps fading down the corridor. When the silence finally settled, he dropped onto the bench, gripping the football like an anchor. He'd never been more sure, or more afraid, that this was only the beginning. By Thursday, every player on the field knew Coach Reyes wasn't like the others. He didn't raise his voice, didn't storm across the turf, didn't throw clipboards when plays fell apart. He just watched. And when his gaze landed on you, it was worse than any curse. Because you knew he'd seen the exact place where you failed. For Eli, that look had become something else entirely, a pulse behind his ribs he couldn't ignore. It was the way Coach Manuel's eyes followed him during drills, sharp and unreadable, or the way his voice softened just enough when Eli caught the ball right, his tone quieter than the applause around them. 3 days of that had left Eli strung tight as wire. He could tell Manuel was fighting something too, the careful distance, the clipped replies, the moments his jaw worked before he looked away. but no one else noticed. To everyone else, Coach Reyes was all discipline and composure. To Eli, he was a storm contained behind steady eyes. That Thursday evening practice stretched later than it should have. The field lights came on, white and harsh against the deepening blue sky. Players drifted off the field one by one, laughter fading into the parking lot. Eli stayed behind again. He didn't even pretend to stretch anymore, just stood near the 50-yard line, tossing the football up and catching it over and over, letting the rhythm drown out the rest of the world. He heard the whistle before he saw him. Walker, Manuel's voice carried across the empty field. Eli caught the ball one last time and turned. Practice is over. I didn't say you could leave. Eli frowned. No one's here but us. Exactly. Manuel walked toward him, steps steady, the edge in his voice somewhere between warning and something darker. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the floodlights tracing the muscles in his forearms. Eli tried to keep his voice light. You planning on another lecture, coach? If you keep testing me, Manuel said, maybe? Eli smirked, more out of nerves than confidence. You don't scare me. Manuel stopped a few feet away. Maybe you should be. The words hung in the warm air. For a moment, neither moved. Eli's heart pounded too loud in his ears. The whole week had been building to this, every glance, every word left unsaid. He dropped the football at his feet. Why do you keep looking at me like that? He asked quietly. Manuel didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked away then back. Like what? Like you're waiting for me to do something wrong. Or something else. The pause stretched. Finally Manuel said, because I'm trying to stop you from ruining yourself. Eli laughed softly, bitterly. You sure about that? Manuel's eyes hardened. Watch it. Eli stepped forward, closing the space between them. You watch it, coach. You talk like you know me, like you've got me figured out, but every time you look at me like that, it doesn't feel like a lecture. Manuel's breath caught, barely noticeable, but Eli saw it. Walker, he said, voice low, you're out of line. Maybe, Eli said. But I think you want me to be. That did it. Manuel's expression changed, not anger, not shock, but something rawer. He reached out, hand gripping Eli's shoulder, not rough but firm enough to stop him. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, Eli whispered. Tell me to stop. The lights buzzed above them. Somewhere, a sprinkler clicked on, the faint hiss of water breaking the silence. Manuel's hand stayed where it was. His thumb pressed against the base of Eli's neck, steady, grounding, too intimate. You think you're untouchable? Manuel said, voice a rasp now. Eli met his gaze. I think you already did. That landed like a punch neither could take back. Manuel's fingers tightened once before he let go, turning away a few paces, trying to steady his breath. You don't understand what this could cost, he said finally. Eli swallowed hard. I don't care. You should. Then why do you keep giving me reasons not to? The question hung there, fragile and sharp. Manuel turned back. His expression had softened, the fight in his posture fading into something tired and real. I'm your coach, he said quietly. That's all I can be. Eli's voice cracked around a laugh. You really believe that? Manuel didn't answer. He just stared at him, and for one long heartbeat, Eli thought he might walk away. But then he took a slow step forward, then another, until there was barely space between them. The scent of grass, sweat, and rain clung to the air. Manuel reached up and brushed a damp curl from Eli's forehead, the gesture so careful it made Eli's throat tighten. This is the line, he said, voice almost breaking. Eli didn't move. Then stop me. Manuel didn't. For a moment that felt suspended in time, everything stilled, the hum of lights, the smell of the field, the world narrowing to two people standing too close under the Texas night. Manuel's hand dropped, but his eyes stayed on Eli's. Every emotion he'd hidden all week was there now. Conflict, desire, fear, longing. He exhaled slowly. You make everything harder than it has to be. Eli smiled faintly. Guess that's my talent. Manuel turned away first. Go home, Walker. Is that an order? It's advice. Eli bent down, picked up the football, his fingers brushing Manuel's as he handed it over. The touch was fleeting, but it lingered like a spark that refused to fade. When Manuel spoke again, his voice was softer. You've got a game this weekend. Focus on that. I'll focus if you stop staring. Manuel gave a short, almost helpless laugh, the first real one Eli had heard from him. You never stop pushing. Maybe I just want to see how far you'll bend. Careful, Walker, Manuel murmured. You're closer to finding out than you think. That night Eli couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, the hum of the dorm's air conditioner filling the room, the sound of Manuel's voice looping in his mind. He remembered the look in his eyes, that flicker of restraint right before he stepped back. He'd seen it. He knew now. Whatever was happening between them wasn't one-sided. It wasn't his imagination. He turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling, whispering into the empty room, "You think I'm untouchable, coach? We'll see." The next morning Manuel showed up to practice early as always. He tried to focus on playbooks, drills, anything that could drown out the memory of Eli standing beneath those floodlights, defiant, breathless, too close. He told himself he'd draw a clear line today. But when Eli jogged onto the field, sweat already glistening on his skin, grin sharp and reckless, Manuel felt that resolve waver. Because the truth he didn't dare admit, not to the team, not to himself, was that Eli Walker scared him. Not because he was reckless, but because he made Manuel feel alive again. The weekend game had been a blur. Eli Walker moved with all the speed and precision he had practiced for weeks, every step measured, every pass calculated. The stadium roared, fans screaming, metal bleachers vibrating under their feet. By the time the final whistle blew, Eli's muscles were screaming, his lungs on fire, but he had done it. He had carried the team to victory. The locker room was chaos. Players cheered, high-fiving and slapping each other on the back. The smell of sweat, dirt and adrenaline hung thick in the air. Eli leaned against a locker, wiping his face with a towel, letting the noise wash over him without absorbing it. He needed quiet. Just a few minutes before the storm of questions, cameras and congratulations hit. He wasn't alone for long. Eli. The voice was calm, steady, impossible to ignore. He turned to see Manuel Reyes standing in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed from the game. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room, but when they settled on Eli, it was like the rest of the chaos disappeared. "Coach," Eli said, trying to sound casual, but his chest felt tight, his pulse beating in his throat. "You should be wrapping up. Everyone's moving out." Manuel's tone was clipped, professional, but there was an edge beneath it, something dangerous. "I needed a minute," Eli said. "Away from them." Manuel's gaze didn't waver. "You're not as invincible as you think." Eli bristled, but the words hit too close to home. "I know," he muttered, looking down at his hands. The locker room emptied gradually, the sounds of clanging lockers and laughter fading. Eventually it was just them. The room felt smaller now, enclosed by tiled walls and lockers, the air heavy with heat and anticipation. Manuel stepped closer. "You pushed harder than anyone tonight," he said quietly. "You should have paced yourself." "I could say the same to you," Eli shot back, though his voice was softer than he intended. "You've been watching me all week. Too close." Manuel's brow furrowed. "I'm your coach. That's what I do." "Then why does it feel like more?" Eli whispered, his voice dropping, almost swallowed by the echoing room. Manuel's jaw tightened. He took a step toward Eli, closing some of the space between them, until Eli could feel the heat radiating off his body. The scent of him, sharp, clean, faintly metallic, made Eli's stomach twist. "You're crossing lines," Manuel said, though the sharpness in his voice wavered. Eli laughed softly, bitter and nervous. "Maybe I like crossing lines." Manuel's hand hovered near Eli's shoulder, a breath away from touching, before he clenched it into a fist at his side. "You have no idea what you're asking for," he said. "I think I do," Eli said, stepping just a fraction closer. The air between them felt like static, thick and charged. For a long moment neither spoke. Eli felt the heat of Manuel's body, the deliberate restraint in his posture, the way his eyes darkened with something unspoken. Finally Manuel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're reckless," he murmured. "And you make everything harder than it has to be." "I'm not trying to make it hard," Eli said, voice low. "I'm just tired of pretending you don't feel it too." Manuel froze, as if Eli had struck a chord too sensitive to bear. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He ran a hand down the side of his face, jaw tight, then looked away toward the lockers, then back. "You're dangerous," Manuel said finally. "You don't understand what this could cost us." Eli's heart hammered. "I don't care." "Then you shouldn't be standing this close." "I want to be," Eli whispered. "I'm done stepping back." Manuel's chest rose and fell, breath uneven. For a fleeting moment the mask slipped. The controlled, composed man who commanded the field was gone. Eli saw the raw tension, the hunger, the fear, all of it hidden beneath layers of discipline. Manuel took a measured step closer. The air between them vibrated, hot and heavy. Eli's pulse surged, every nerve alight. He could feel the faint brush of Manuel's fingertips against his arm, the proximity making his stomach twist. "You don't know how close you are to crossing a line," Manuel said, voice tight. "Then show me," Eli whispered. Manuel's eyes darkened, a shadow of emotion flickering across them, something that was equal parts restraint and desire. He moved, stopping inches from Eli, the room closing around them. Eli could feel Manuel's breath, steady but ragged, and the weight of his gaze intense enough to burn. For a moment they simply stared at each other, suspended in tension. Every instinct in Eli screamed forward. Every instinct in Manuel screamed to pull away. But neither did. Manuel's hand brushed against Eli's cheek, just a whisper of touch, and Eli's chest tightened. It was the closest they had ever been. The line they had danced around all week trembled, threatening to shatter. "I can't," Manuel murmured. "Not here. Not like this." Eli pressed slightly closer. "Then where? When?" Manuel exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "You don't know how much I want to, but I can't risk it. You have a career. I have responsibilities." "I don't care," Eli said. "I don't care about anything else. Just this." Manuel stepped back, finally putting space between them, though the heat lingered, thick as smoke. "Go home, Walker," he said, voice hoarse. Eli nodded, swallowing the ache in his chest. "Yes, coach." He left the locker room, each step echoing, feeling the weight of what had almost happened. Manuel stood behind him for a moment, gaze fixed on his retreating figure. When the door closed, Manuel's hand dropped to his side. He leaned against the locker, eyes closed, breathing shallow. The room felt suddenly too quiet, too empty. The tension that had filled it remained, a tangible thing, impossible to shake. Outside the sun had dipped low. The field lay in shadows, a quiet reminder of everything they hadn't said, everything they hadn't allowed themselves to do. For Eli, sleep would not come easy that night. He replayed every second, the brush of Manuel's fingers, the heat of his gaze, the pull of something forbidden and irresistible. And he knew one truth he couldn't ignore. Whatever line Manuel had tried to enforce had already been crossed. Not in action, not yet, but in heart, in mind, in the heat between them that refused to die. The campus was quiet, the fading sunlight painting the field in streaks of gold and amber. Eli Walker lingered near the 50-yard line, helmet dangling from one hand, muscles still buzzing from the game. He wasn't supposed to be here, he had homework, dinner, a life, but the pull, the ache was too strong. He needed to see Manuel one last time. Manuel Reyes appeared at the edge of the field, slow, deliberate steps closing the distance. His jacket was loose over his broad shoulders, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the faint sheen of sweat catching the light. The weeks of tension between them had thickened into something tangible. The air seemed charged, humming with unspoken words, withheld desire, and the danger of being caught. "You shouldn't be here," Manuel said softly, voice low and measured, but the edge of emotion in it made Eli's chest tighten. "I needed to see you," Eli said, his voice rough and unsteady. "I can't pretend anymore." Manuel's dark eyes flicked over him, lingering too long on the damp curls sticking to Eli's forehead, the damp sheen of sweat on his skin. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. "You're reckless," Manuel murmured, stepping closer, hands hanging by his sides just short of touching. "And you make everything impossible." "Then don't fight it," Eli whispered. He stepped forward until their shoulders nearly brushed, heat radiating between them. "Not tonight." For the first time Manuel's control wavered. His hand rose slowly, hesitated, then rested lightly against Eli's cheek, thumb brushing softly across his jaw. Eli's breath hitched. The closeness, the intimacy of the touch, was more than either of them had allowed before. "You know this is dangerous," Manuel said, voice low, tense. "Everything we've done, everything we feel, could destroy us." "I don't care," Eli breathed, stepping even closer, pressing his forehead against Manuel's. "Not tonight." Manuel's hands moved, bracing against Eli's shoulders, pulling him near. The warmth, the pulse of Manuel's heartbeat beneath his palms, made Eli dizzy. Their breaths mingled. The faint scent of soap and sweat filled Eli's senses. Every nerve in his body was alight. Eli's hands rose, resting lightly on Manuel's chest, feeling the taut muscles, the solid strength beneath the shirt. Every inch of Manuel's presence was magnetic, drawing him in, daring him to step over the line they danced around for weeks. "You're impossible," Manuel murmured, voice rough with emotion. His lips hovered near Eli's, so close that Eli could feel the heat of his breath. Do you have any idea what you're asking for? I've wanted this, Eli admitted softly. Since day one. Manuel's lips brushed against his in a feather-light kiss, tentative at first, testing, then more insistent as the weeks of tension poured into it. Eli responded immediately, leaning into the warmth, hands moving up to press into Manuel's chest. Every touch, every heartbeat, every gasp was charged with longing they had denied for far too long. They pressed together, bodies close, heat radiating between them. Manuel's hands roamed, brushing across Eli's shoulders, the small of his back, fingertips tracing lines that made Eli shiver. Every motion was deliberate, every brush of skin against skin full of electric intensity. Eli, Manuel whispered against his lips, voice trembling with restraint. We shouldn't. Don't stop, Eli whispered back, pressing closer. Not tonight. The world outside the field ceased to exist. The roar of the stadium, the empty bleachers, even the setting sun, it all disappeared. There was only the heat, the closeness, the stolen touches that spoke louder than words ever could. Every glance, every breath, every press of lips and hands was a declaration. Manuel's hands lingered, tracing over Eli's arms, shoulders, and neck. Eli's hands explored the lines of Manuel's chest through the fabric of his shirt, memorizing the solid warmth, the controlled strength. Every touch was a confession, every press an acknowledgement of weeks of suppressed desire. Finally, breathless, they parted slightly, foreheads resting together, hearts pounding in unison. Manuel's lips brushed across Eli's temple, a soft, lingering caress. You've changed everything, he murmured. I know, Eli whispered, voice trembling. And I don't regret a thing. They stayed there, wrapped in the warmth of each other, the tension of their forbidden closeness, for what felt like hours. No one could see them, no rules mattered here. They had crossed all boundaries and it had changed them forever. Months later. The stadium lights blazed over the NFL field, crowd roaring like a living thing. Eli Walker stood on the sidelines, helmet under his arm, the adrenaline still coursing through him after another grueling game. He moved with precision, confidence, and a fire that no one could see but him. In the quiet of his mind, he felt the ghost of Manuel Reyes, the man who had taught him discipline, restraint, and the intoxicating weight of desire. He remembered their nights on empty fields, stolen touches, lingering kisses, whispered confessions under the floodlights. Eli smiled faintly, fingers brushing over the edge of his helmet. You changed me, he whispered into the chaos, into the memory of all they had shared. He glanced up at the empty stands and sideline where Manuel's presence had once commanded everything, where warmth and desire had collided, and knew that every victory, every challenge, every moment on the field carried a part of that intimacy. Somewhere far away Manuel carried it too. The memory of that night, the closeness, the passion, the crossing of boundaries, remained etched in him as sharply as it did in Eli. They had defied rules, broken barriers, and given themselves to a moment of impossible, beautiful intensity. And though distance, life, and duty kept them apart, the fire they had ignited continued to burn in both their hearts. Eli's eyes focused on the field, the stadium alive around him. He smiled, knowing with certainty that some connections could never fade. Some lines, once crossed, remained forever burned into the soul.